My fiancé betrayed me days before the wedding, but the surprise I gave him at the altar changed everything. I found out about Damien's affair 3 days before our wedding, not through some dramatic confrontation or suspicious text message. Through my florist. She called to confirm the delivery address for the bridal bouquet. But there was a problem. Apparently Damien had also ordered flowers for another event that same weekend. A romantic getaway, with his co-worker Valencia at the lake house his family owned. The same lake house where we'd gotten engaged 6 months earlier. When I confronted our florist, she was mortified. She'd assumed I knew about both orders since they were on the same credit card. The romantic weekend package, red roses, champagne, the works. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. 2 years of planning, deposits paid, guests flying in from across the country, my dress hanging in the closet like a ghost of future happiness. I sat in our apartment, staring at wedding favors I'd spent months personalizing. Little picture frames with our engagement photo, Damien and me laughing on the dock at his family's lake house, completely in love, or so I'd thought. The apartment suddenly felt foreign. Every shared item now carried the weight of deception. The coffee table we'd picked out together, the couch where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies, the kitchen where he'd made me breakfast just that morning, kissing my forehead and telling me how excited he was for our big day. All of it was contaminated now. My first instinct was to call him, scream, demand explanations. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of how my dad had handled my mom's affair when I was 12. All that yelling and crying and public humiliation, how it solved nothing and only made everyone feel worse. I wanted to be smarter than that. So I called Valencia instead. I found her number in Damien's phone, which he'd left charging on the kitchen counter. The contact was listed as Val with a heart emoji. Seeing that tiny symbol felt like a knife between my ribs. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and happy. "Hi, baby," she said, clearly expecting Damien. When I introduced myself as Damien's fiancé, the silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, she whispered, "Damien told me you two broke up months ago." My heart stopped. He'd been lying to both of us. Valencia started crying. She genuinely had no idea we were still together, still planning a wedding. She'd been dating him for 4 months, believing she was helping him heal from a bad breakup. We talked for 2 hours, comparing stories, filling in gaps, the business trips that weren't business trips, the late nights at the office that were actually late nights at her apartment, the mysterious phone calls he'd taken in another room, the weekend conferences that never appeared on his company website. Valencia told me about their first date, how he'd taken her to Giuseppe's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, claiming it was his favorite place, how he'd ordered wine with confidence, discussing vintages like he was an expert. I'd never seen him drink anything more sophisticated than beer. He'd always claimed wine gave him headaches. She described how he'd told her about his heartbreak, how his ex-fiancé had become controlling and jealous, how she'd demanded to know where he was every minute of every day, how she'd gone through his phone and accused him of cheating when he was completely faithful. The irony was devastating. She described the version of himself he'd presented to her, cultured, worldly, recently heartbroken but ready to love again, a successful businessman who traveled frequently for important clients. He'd taken her to art galleries, claiming he appreciated fine culture. I'd tried for 2 years to get him to visit a museum with me. He always said art was boring and pretentious. He'd bought her books of poetry, saying he loved how deeply she felt things. When I'd shared my own poetry with him, he'd called it depressing and asked if I could write something happier. I described the version I knew, the man who left dirty dishes in the sink for days, who spent weekends playing video games in his underwear, who claimed he was lactose intolerant to avoid trying new restaurants but somehow never had problems when we ordered pizza. The man who complained when I asked him to help with wedding planning, saying it was the bride's job to handle details. The man who'd forgotten our anniversary 2 years running. The man who'd proposed with a ring he'd bought at a pawn shop, then asked me to pay half when money got tight. We were dating completely different people. Valencia told me about the gifts he'd given her. Expensive jewelry, weekend getaways, flowers delivered to her office just because. She'd thought she'd finally found a romantic partner, someone who understood the importance of grand gestures. I realized he'd been using my credit cards for all of it. By the end of our conversation, Valencia was as devastated as I was. But we both agreed on one thing: Damien deserved consequences. I spent the next 2 days planning, not canceling the wedding, planning something else entirely. First, I called my sister. She lived 3 states away, but had taken the week off work to help with wedding preparations. When I told her what had happened, she went silent for a full minute. "That bastard," she finally said. "I never liked him, but I never imagined he was capable of this." She offered to fly home immediately to help me through the crisis. Instead, I asked her to stay and help me plan my revenge. Then I called my best friend from college. She'd been my roommate for 4 years, had seen me through breakups and family drama and the stress of graduate school. She'd always been protective of me, sometimes to a fault. "I want to kill him," she said immediately. "Where does he live? I'm driving over there right now." I laughed despite everything. "That's exactly why I'm calling you. I need someone who's angry on my behalf but won't do anything stupid." She agreed to help with whatever I was planning. Then my mom, who had been nothing but supportive throughout the entire wedding planning process. She'd taken vacation days to help with arrangements. She'd spent her own money on flowers and decorations. She'd been more excited about this wedding than I was. "Oh, honey," she said when I told her. "I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? We can cancel everything. I'll call the vendors." "That's not what I want," I said. "I want him to pay for what he's done." "What do you mean?" I explained my plan. She was quiet for a long time. "Sweetheart," she said finally, "are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone? It's going to be embarrassing for you too." I thought about that. She was right. Standing at the altar and exposing Damien's lies would be humiliating for me as well. People would pity me. They'd whisper about how I hadn't known what was happening in my own relationship. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was marrying someone who had been lying to my face for months. The alternative was pretending everything was fine while he continued to betray me. I'd rather be embarrassed than be a fool. Valencia agreed to help. So did my sister and my best friend when I told them everything. Even my dad, surprisingly, was on board with my idea. He'd always been protective of me, but I hadn't expected him to be quite so enthusiastic about public humiliation. Actually, my dad said over dinner the night before the wedding, "I think this is brilliant. He needs to face consequences for his actions. And maybe other people will learn something too." We were eating at my parents' house, the same dining room where Damien had asked my dad for permission to marry me 8 months earlier, the same table where we'd planned the wedding details, the same chairs where Damien had charmed my entire family with stories about our future together. My dad had always been a good judge of character. I wondered now if he'd had reservations about Damien that he'd kept to himself. "Did you ever suspect anything?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, cutting his pot roast carefully. There were little things, he admitted. "He never seemed to know details about your life that a fiancé should know. He couldn't remember your middle name at Christmas dinner. He didn't know you were allergic to shellfish when we went to that seafood restaurant. Those seemed like small things at the time," my mom added. "We thought he was just nervous or distracted with work. But looking back," my dad continued, "it's like he wasn't really paying attention to who you are as a person. Like he was going through the motions of being your partner without actually being present." The observation stung because it was so accurate. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We should have said something," she said. "We were trying to be supportive, but maybe we should have trusted our instincts." "It wouldn't have mattered," I said. I was so invested in the idea of our future together that I probably wouldn't have listened anyway. That night, I barely slept. I kept going over the plan, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Valencia and I had exchanged phone numbers and coordinated our timing. My sister had arranged for the second bouquet. My cousins had agreed to block the exits if Damien tried to run. Everything was in place. The morning of the wedding, I woke up surprisingly calm. I'd expected to be nervous or sad or angry. Instead, I felt focused, determined, like an athlete before a big competition. I got dressed as planned, hair perfectly styled by the same woman who'd done my mom's wedding 30 years ago. She chattered about how beautiful I looked, how lucky Damien was, how excited she was to see the ceremony. Margaret had been doing hair for weddings longer than I'd been alive. She'd seen generations of brides, had stories about every kind of wedding drama imaginable. She had no idea she was about to witness something unprecedented. I smiled and nodded and let her believe in the fairy tale. She told me about the other weddings she'd done that month, a couple who'd been high school sweethearts, finally getting married after 10 years together. A second marriage for both bride and groom, each bringing children from previous relationships. A destination wedding that had been rescheduled 3 times due to weather. All of them sounded like real love stories. Complicated maybe, but honest. Makeup was applied by my cousin who worked at a high-end salon downtown. She'd taken the morning off specifically to make me look perfect. Foundation, concealer, contouring, eyes that could be seen from the back of the church, lips that would photograph beautifully. She was an artist with cosmetics, had trained at the best schools and worked with celebrities when they came through town. She made me look like a magazine cover. I looked exactly like the bride I was supposed to be. My grandmother's pearls went around my neck, the same ones she'd worn to her own wedding in 1952, when marrying my grandfather was the happiest day of her life. They'd been married for 63 years before he died. Their love story was legendary in our family. Grandma had met Grandpa at a USO dance during the war. He was shipping out to Europe the next week. They wrote letters for 2 years while he was overseas, fell in love through written words and shared dreams. When he came home, he proposed within a month. They'd had their struggles. Money was tight in the early years. Grandpa worked 2 jobs to support the family. Grandma raised 5 children while managing the household budget and tending a victory garden. But they never lied to each other. They never betrayed each other's trust. The pearls had been Grandpa's wedding gift to her, bought with money he'd saved from his military pay. They weren't expensive, but they represented his commitment to building a life together. Now they were supposed to be passed down to me, symbolizing the continuation of that tradition of faithful love. My dress was everything I'd dreamed of. Ivory silk with intricate beadwork that had taken months to complete. A train that required 2 people to carry properly. Sleeves that made me feel elegant and sophisticated. It had cost more than my car, but I'd saved for 2 years to afford it. I'd tried on dozens of dresses before finding this one. The moment I put it on, I knew it was perfect. The sales associate had cried when she saw me in it. My mom had cried. Even the other customers in the boutique had stopped to admire it. It was supposed to be the dress I wore to marry the love of my life. I looked exactly like the bride I was supposed to be. My mom came into the bridal suite as I was putting on my shoes. "You look stunning," she said, tears in her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." She hugged me carefully, trying not to mess up my hair or makeup. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." Her words meant everything to me. My mom had always been supportive, but she'd also taught me the importance of self-respect. She'd shown me through her own example what it meant to have standards and stick to them. The bridesmaids gathered for photos. My sister, my best friend from college, my cousin, and 2 friends from work. They all knew what was about to happen. They were nervous but supportive. "Are you sure you want to do this?" my sister asked for the 100th time. "It's not too late to just call it off quietly." "I'm sure," I said. "He made his choices. Now he gets to face the consequences." "What if he tries to stop you?" my best friend asked. "He won't," I said. "He's too proud. He'll think he can charm his way out of it." "What if he denies everything?" asked my cousin. "That's what Valencia is for." My work friends were the most nervous. They barely knew Damien, had only met him at a few office parties, but they'd seen how happy I'd seemed about the wedding, how excited I'd been about the future. "This is so brave," one of them said. "I don't think I could do what you're doing." "You could if you had to," I replied. We're all stronger than we think we are. The photographer captured everything. Getting ready shots. The bridesmaids helping me with my dress. Emotional moments with my mom. Pictures that looked exactly like every other wedding album in history. She was a professional, someone who'd photographed hundreds of weddings. She had no idea she was about to document something completely different. Except this wedding was going to be different. The ride to the church was quiet. My dad drove, my mom in the passenger seat, me in the back with my dress spread carefully around me. We passed other cars with wedding decorations, heading to their own ceremonies. Normal weddings where the bride and groom were actually committed to each other. St. Mary's looked beautiful. White ribbons and flowers decorated the entrance. A red carpet led up the steps. Guests were arriving in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing and taking pictures. It looked like every wedding I'd ever attended, joyful and hopeful and full of love. Damien was waiting at the altar when I walked down the aisle, handsome in his tuxedo, smiling at me like he hadn't spent the previous night texting another woman. His best man stood beside him, completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. The groomsmen looked proud and happy, thrilled to be part of what they thought was a love story. They'd all rented their tuxedos from the same shop downtown. They'd all had their hair cut the day before. They'd all given toasts at the bachelor party about what a good guy Damien was and how lucky I was to marry him. The church was packed. Everyone we loved gathered to celebrate our future together. My college roommates in the third row, his fraternity brothers scattered throughout the congregation, our grandparents in the front, beaming with pride. 300 people who had no idea they were about to witness something unprecedented. I saw faces from every part of my life. Elementary school friends who'd driven hours to be there, former co-workers who'd taken vacation days, distant relatives who'd flown in from other states, all of them dressed in their best clothes, all of them happy for what they thought was my special day. The music swelled as I walked down the aisle. Traditional wedding march, played by the organist who'd been at this church for 40 years. Mrs. Patterson had played for my parents' wedding, for my sister's first communion, for countless ceremonies that marked the important moments in our community. She had no idea she was providing the soundtrack to something that would be talked about for years. My dad walked beside me, his arm steady and reassuring. He squeezed my hand gently as we reached the altar. In that moment, I felt his complete support. Whatever happened next, he was proud of me for choosing truth over comfort. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Father Martinez asked. "Her mother and I do," my dad replied, then kissed my cheek and sat down. His kiss felt like a blessing and a promise. Whatever happened next, my family would stand by me. As I reached the altar, Damien took my hands and whispered, "You look incredible." I smiled back and whispered, "So do you. Too bad you won't look that way much longer." His smile faltered, confusion flickered across his face. For just a moment, I felt sorry for him. He genuinely had no idea what was coming. In his mind, he'd managed everything perfectly. He'd kept both relationships separate and successful. He probably thought he was clever. The officiant began the ceremony. Father Martinez had known both our families for decades. He'd baptized me as a baby and confirmed Damien when he was 13. He'd counseled us through our pre-marriage classes, discussing communication and trust and building a life together. Those counseling sessions seemed like cruel jokes now. We'd talked about honesty in marriage, about the importance of being faithful to each other, about building a foundation of trust that could weather any storm. Damien had nodded along, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely committed to building a strong marriage, all while planning getaways with another woman. This should have been a joyous occasion for Father Martinez, too. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The congregation settled into their seats, ready for a traditional ceremony. Programs rustled as people followed along with the order of service. Someone's phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," Father Martinez continued, "not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God." The words took on new meaning in light of what I knew. Sacred covenant, not entered into lightly. The irony was devastating. We exchanged rings. Damien's hands were sweating, but he played his part perfectly. The rings we'd chosen together 6 months ago, when I still believed in our future. The rings that cost more than some people's cars. White gold bands with diamonds that caught the light from the church windows. I'd spent hours picking out those rings. We'd visited 5 different jewelry stores, comparing styles and discussing what we wanted our rings to represent. Damien had seemed genuinely invested in the process, talking about how important it was that we both love what we'd wear for the rest of our lives. Another lie. I slipped his ring onto his finger, thinking about all the promises it was supposed to represent. Fidelity, honesty, partnership. He slipped mine onto my finger, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness. This should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, it was just another step in exposing the biggest betrayal I'd ever experienced. When we reached the vows, I pulled out the paper I'd prepared. But instead of the romantic promises everyone expected, I began to read something else entirely. "Damien," I started, my voice carrying clearly through the church. "Today was supposed to be about promising to love and honor each other, about pledging our futures together." He nodded, still confused but playing along. Around us, the congregation was settling in to hear heartfelt vows. Phones were coming out to record the moment. People were smiling expectantly. "So I want to honor that spirit of honesty by sharing some promises you've already made to other people recently." The color drained from his face. I continued reading from my carefully prepared notes. "On March 15th, you promised Valencia Rodriguez you'd spend your entire weekend with her at your family's lake house, the same weekend as our honeymoon." Gasps echoed through the church. Damien's mother stood up in the front pew, her face horrified. His father grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down. "You promised her that you and I had broken up months ago. I continued, my voice steady and clear. You promised her that she was the only woman in your life. You promised her a future that you were simultaneously promising to me. The gasps turned into murmurs. People were turning to each other, trying to process what they were hearing. Someone in the back was asking loudly what was happening. I kept going, reading from the detailed timeline Valencia and I had constructed together. On March 22nd, you told her you loved her for the first time. The same week, you told me you couldn't wait to start our married life together. On April 3rd, you gave her a key to your apartment. Our apartment. The apartment where we've been living together for 2 years. Damien tried to grab the paper from my hands. Babe, stop. You're confused. You're having some kind of breakdown. His voice was shaking. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the church. No, I said clearly. I'm not confused. Valencia is here today. She wanted to see what kind of man lies to 2 women simultaneously. I gestured toward the back of the church. Valencia stood up from the last pew, wearing the red dress Damien had bought her for their 4-month anniversary. The same dress she'd shown me in the photos on his phone, which she'd willingly shared during our long conversation. She looked stunning. Professional, but feminine. The kind of woman any man would be proud to have on his arm. Dark hair styled in an elegant updo. Makeup that enhanced her natural beauty without being overdone. The confident posture of someone successful in her career. The church erupted. People turning in their seats. Voices rising in shock and confusion. Someone's baby started crying, as if sensing the tension. An elderly man near the back was asking loudly what was happening. Father Martinez looked like he was reconsidering his entire career. Damien's best man stepped forward. Dude, what is happening? His voice cracked on the question. This was his childhood friend, someone who'd known Damien for 20 years, someone who'd given a bachelor party toast about what a good guy Damien was, how he'd never met anyone more loyal or trustworthy. The cognitive dissonance was written all over his face. What's happening, I said, is that Damien has been living 2 separate lives, making promises to 2 different women, planning 2 different futures. So I thought our wedding would be the perfect place to honor all his commitments. I turned to the officiant, who looked completely bewildered. Father Martinez had officiated hundreds of weddings in his 40-year career. He'd seen runaway brides and objecting guests and forgotten rings. He'd dealt with family drama and last-minute cold feet and nervous breakdowns. But nothing like this. Father Martinez, would you please ask Valencia to join us at the altar? The poor man looked like he was considering early retirement. He stammered. This is highly irregular. So is bigamy, I replied, but we're not here to judge. We're here to celebrate honesty. A few people in the congregation actually laughed at that. Dark humor in the face of unbelievable drama. Valencia walked down the aisle, tears streaming down her face, but her head held high. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Long dark hair that moved like silk, elegant posture that suggested dance training or years of deportment classes. The kind of confidence that came from a successful career and genuine accomplishments. I could see why Damien had been attracted to her. I could also see why she'd been attracted to him. He could be charming when he wanted to be. Attentive. Romantic. When she reached us, I handed her a second bouquet that my sister had been hiding behind the altar. White roses and baby's breath, identical to mine except for the ribbon. We'd planned this detail carefully, wanting the visual impact to be perfect. Now, I announced to the congregation, instead of one wedding, we're going to have a conversation about honesty. Damien was frantically whispering denials, but his voice was drowned out by the murmur of 300 guests trying to process what they were witnessing. This is insane, he kept saying. You're both insane. This is my wedding too. I'd prepared for this moment, researched every detail, consulted with friends who were lawyers, made sure everything I was about to do was legal and wouldn't result in any charges against me. Valencia, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, would you like to tell everyone about the vacation you and Damien were supposed to take this weekend? She nodded, wiping her eyes with the tissue my sister had thoughtfully provided. He booked us a romantic getaway at the Lakeside Inn, 3 days and 2 nights in the honeymoon suite. He said he wanted to celebrate finally moving on from his ex-fiancé. Her voice was steady despite her tears. Professional training from years of giving presentations at work. He told me you were bitter and vindictive, she continued. He said that's why the relationship ended. He said you'd been trying to get back together with him for months, but he wasn't interested. The church fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop, she continued. He said you'd been stalking him, showing up at his work, calling him at all hours. He said he was worried about your mental health, but didn't know how to help you. More murmurs rippled through the congregation. People were looking at me with sympathy now, realizing I'd been portrayed as the crazy ex-girlfriend. What else did he promise you? I asked. Valencia took a deep breath. He promised he'd move out of your shared apartment by the end of the month. He promised he'd introduce me to his family at Easter dinner. He promised we'd go to his company picnic together next month as a couple. Every promise was another nail in Damien's coffin. He also promised, she continued, voice growing stronger, that he'd never lied to anyone before about anything important. He said honesty was the most important quality in a relationship. A few people in the congregation made sounds of disgust. Damien tried to step between us. This is insane. You're both crazy. You planned this together, didn't you? You're trying to destroy me. The desperation in his voice was becoming obvious to everyone. No, Valencia said quietly. You destroyed yourself. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I have 4 months of text messages, photos of us together, videos he sent me from business trips that apparently weren't business trips, hotel receipts he asked me to keep for tax purposes. She started scrolling through her phone, holding it up so people in the front rows could see. Here's a video he sent me from Chicago last month, she said. He said he was there for a client meeting. I looked at the video. Damien in a hotel room, telling Valencia he missed her and couldn't wait to get home to see her. I was at my sister's house that weekend, I told the congregation. He said he was in Chicago for work. He came home with souvenirs from the airport gift shop. The evidence was overwhelming and getting more damning by the minute. Here's another one, Valencia continued, scrolling through her phone. From Atlanta 3 weeks ago. He's telling me about the restaurant he went to, how he wished I was there with him. That was the weekend of my bachelorette party, I said. He claimed he was working late every night to finish a project before the wedding. My sister stood up from her seat. I was with her at the bachelorette party, she called out. She was worried about him working so hard. She kept saying she felt guilty for being out having fun while her fiancé was sacrificing for their future. The irony was devastating. My dad stood up from his seat in the second row. He'd been skeptical of my plan initially, worried about the public humiliation aspect, but now he looked proud and furious at the same time. Damien, he called out, you have 2 choices. Tell the truth right now, or Valencia and my daughter will tell it for you. His voice carried the authority of a man who'd served in the military for 20 years before becoming a high school principal. When my dad used that tone, people listened. The church was completely silent now, waiting for Damien's response. Damien looked around the church, searching for escape or support. He found neither. His own family was staring at him with disgust. His friends were shaking their heads in disbelief. His grandmother, 93 years old and sharp as a tack, was glaring at him with the fury of someone who'd lived through the Depression and World War II and had no patience for this kind of nonsense. Even the children in the congregation seemed to understand that something terrible was happening. The officiant stepped forward. Son, this is the house of God. If you have something to confess, now would be the time. Father Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. He'd counseled thousands of people through crises of faith and conscience. He knew a moment of reckoning when he saw one. For a moment, I thought Damien might actually come clean. His shoulders sagged. His perfectly styled hair was starting to fall into his face. The composure he'd maintained his entire life was cracking like ice in spring. Then his expression hardened. Fine, he said. Yes, I've been seeing Valencia. But that doesn't make me a monster. People grow apart. Feelings change. I was trying to figure things out. The church erupted again. This time his own mother was shouting. You were planning to marry another woman while living with someone else, she cried. How could you do this to both of them? Her voice was raw with pain and embarrassment. This was her son, the child she'd raised to be honest and respectful. The boy who'd once walked 3 blocks in the rain to return $1 he'd found on the sidewalk because it might belong to someone who needed it. Because I couldn't decide, Damien shot back. I loved both of them. Is that so terrible? Yes, Valencia and I said simultaneously. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, in my wedding dress, tag-teaming my cheating fiancé with his other girlfriend in front of 300 people in a church. But it felt right. It felt powerful. I had one more surprise. Damien, I said, reaching into my bouquet. Since you love making promises you can't keep, I have something for you. I pulled out an envelope and handed it to him. What is this? He asked suspiciously. Open it. Inside were legal documents. Not what he expected. Those aren't divorce papers, I explained to the confused congregation. We were never legally married. But they are something else entirely. This was only partially true, but the look on his face made it worth the small lie. You see, I continued. 3 months ago, I discovered that Damien had been stealing money from my savings account. $23,000 over the past year. Money I'd been saving since I was 16, working summers and weekends to build our future. His mother gasped. Several people in the congregation made shocked noises. The church fell silent again. I hired a private investigator, I went on. Not to catch him cheating, though that was an unexpected bonus. To build a case for theft. Those papers are a civil lawsuit for the money he stole, plus interest, plus damages. Now Damien looked genuinely panicked. The PI found everything, I continued. The secret credit cards he opened in my name. The personal loan he took out using my information as collateral without my knowledge. The gambling debts he's been hiding. The money he's been spending on Valencia while stealing from me to pay our shared expenses. Valencia looked shocked. She hadn't known about the financial crimes. You've been paying for our dates with stolen money? She asked, horrified. The expensive dinners, the weekend getaways, the jewelry. All of it bought with money stolen from the woman he was supposed to marry. Damien didn't answer. I gestured toward the back of the church again. A man in a suit stood up. This was actually Detective Morrison, my cousin's husband, who was off duty but had agreed to play a part. Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Unit has been waiting to meet you, Damien. This part wasn't entirely true, but it had the desired effect. Damien bolted. He pushed past the officiant, stumbled down the altar steps, and ran toward the side exit of the church. He didn't make it far. My brother and 3 of my male cousins had been positioned at every exit, just in case. They weren't going to hurt him, but they weren't going to let him leave until we were finished either. Damien found himself trapped in the church with 300 people who now knew exactly what kind of man he was. The look of panic on his face was almost pitiful. Let me out, he pleaded with my brother. This is harassment. This is kidnapping. No, my brother said calmly. This is accountability. Valencia walked over to me. Thank you, she said quietly. I never would have found out the truth if you hadn't called me. I was falling in love with him. Her voice broke a little on those last words. I know, I said. So was I. That's what makes this so devastating. The officiant, bless his heart, was still trying to maintain some semblance of order. Well, he said uncertainly, this is certainly not how I expected the ceremony to go. The congregation actually laughed. The tension broke a little. I walked to the microphone that had been set up for our vows. Everyone, I said, thank you for being here today. I know this isn't what you expected when you came to celebrate love and marriage. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the church. But sometimes love means refusing to accept lies. Sometimes it means choosing truth over comfort. Sometimes it means standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying and public and messy. I looked directly at Damien, who was now sitting in a pew, his head in his hands. Damien, you had every opportunity to be honest. With me, with Valencia. With yourself. You could have broken up with me before starting something with her. You could have been a decent human being. You chose deception instead. I turned back to the congregation. So instead of a wedding, we're having a different kind of ceremony today. A celebration of truth, of women supporting each other instead of competing, of refusing to accept less than we deserve. The church erupted in applause. My mom was crying happy tears. My dad was beaming with pride. Even Damien's family was clapping, mortified by his behavior but supportive of what Valencia and I had done. Valencia stepped up to the microphone next to me. I want to thank everyone for witnessing this, she said, and I want to apologize for my part in this mess. I had no idea Damien was engaged. If I had known, I never would have gotten involved. I'm not the kind of person who knowingly breaks up relationships. More applause, she continued, but I'm grateful that his lies brought me and this incredible woman together. We've decided to be friends instead of rivals. We've spent the past 3 days planning this together, and I've learned more about courage and strength from her than I have from anyone in years. It was true. Over the past 3 days, Valencia and I had talked for hours. She was smart, funny, successful in her own right, and had been just as manipulated as I had. She worked as an accountant for a major firm, had an MBA from Northwestern, and deserved someone who would be honest with her. She'd grown up in a small town in Iowa, worked her way through college, and moved to the city to build a career. She was exactly the kind of accomplished, independent woman I'd want as a friend under different circumstances. We weren't going to let Damien's betrayal destroy either of us. The officiant stepped forward again. Well, he said with a smile, I can't marry you to each other, but I can bless this friendship. And I can say that what I've witnessed here today takes more courage than most marriages require. Everyone laughed. Even I laughed for the first time in 3 days. Damien finally stood up. Are you all insane? He shouted. This is my wedding too. My family is here. My friends are here. You've humiliated me in front of everyone I know. His voice was getting higher with each word, panic setting in as the reality of his situation became clear. Good, my sister called out from her seat. You humiliated yourself. Damien's best man walked over to him. Dude, he said quietly but audibly, you need to leave, now, before this gets worse. The best man looked genuinely shaken. He'd known Damien since they were kids. He'd given a bachelor party toast about what a loyal friend Damien was, how he'd never met anyone more trustworthy. Now he was realizing he'd never really known Damien at all. How could it get worse? Damien demanded. I smiled. Well, I said, Valencia and I have been comparing notes for 3 days. We found some interesting things. I pulled out my phone. Like the fact that you've been doing this for years. We contacted 3 of your ex-girlfriends. Turns out you were cheating on all of them too. The congregation was riveted now. This was better than any soap opera they'd ever watched. Rachel, from your senior year of college, said you were seeing her and 2 other girls simultaneously. She thought she was your girlfriend for 8 months. Turns out she was just one of 3. Damien went pale. We talked to her roommate too, Valencia added. She said you had different stories about your background for each girl. Told Rachel you were pre-med. Told the others you were in business school. Jessica, from your first job, said you borrowed $5,000 from her for what you claimed was a family emergency. I continued. Your grandmother's cancer treatment, you said. You never paid it back. Turns out you used it for a vacation with another woman. And your grandmother was perfectly healthy, Valencia pointed out. Amanda, from 2 years ago, said you used her credit card for a weekend getaway with someone you claimed was your sister. Turns out it wasn't your sister. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone. There were others too, I said. Women who didn't want to get involved but confirmed the pattern. You've been living multiple lives for years, telling each woman exactly what she wanted to hear. The church was completely silent now, absorbed in the unfolding drama. Or the fact that you've been stealing from your employer, Valencia said, taking over. I work in accounting at his company. When I started dating him, I noticed some discrepancies in the accounts I manage. I've been documenting everything for weeks, trying to figure out what was wrong. She pulled out a folder she'd been carrying. He's been billing personal expenses to client accounts. Dinners, hotels, gifts, thousands of dollars over the past year. I made copies of everything because I thought someone else was embezzling. I was trying to protect the company. The irony was devastating. Valencia had been trying to protect the company from the very man she was dating. Or, I continued, the fact that you've been lying about your college degree. Valencia's friend works in HR at your company. They did a background check when you were up for promotion. You never actually graduated from State University. You've been lying about having a business degree for 5 years. This was the revelation that seemed to shock people the most. Everything else was personal betrayal. This was professional fraud. The lies just kept unraveling. Wait, Valencia said, looking confused. You told me you graduated magna cum laude. You showed me your diploma. Fake, I said. I found the website where he ordered it. $29 plus shipping. With each revelation, Damien seemed to shrink smaller. His carefully constructed life was falling apart in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His mother stood up. Damien Mitchell Henderson, she said in a voice that could cut glass. You are no longer welcome in this family until you get the help you clearly need and make amends to everyone you've hurt. The formal use of his full name made the declaration even more powerful. His father nodded grimly. Son, your mother and I are ashamed of you. We raised you better than this. His voice was quiet but carried throughout the church. His grandmother, the 93-year-old force of nature, struggled to her feet with the help of her walker. In my day, she said loudly, men who behave like this were run out of town on a rail. Consider yourself lucky that all you're getting is public embarrassment. The congregation applauded again. Even some of Damien's friends were shaking their heads in disgust. His college fraternity brothers, who'd flown in for the wedding, were whispering among themselves and shooting him dirty looks. His co-workers, who'd taken the day off to attend, were discussing in hushed tones how this would affect the office dynamic. Finally, Damien had had enough. Fine, he said. Fine. You win. You all win. I'm a terrible person. I'm a liar and a cheat and a thief. Are you happy now? No one answered. I just wanted to be loved, he said, his voice breaking. I just wanted everyone to love me. The church was quiet. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. Valencia stepped forward. The way you get people to love you is by being worthy of love, she said gently. Not by lying to them, not by stealing from them, not by manipulating them. Her voice was kind but firm. Even now, after everything, she was trying to help him understand. You don't get love by taking it, she continued. You get love by giving it, by being honest and trustworthy and putting other people's needs before your own sometimes. I thought about that. Damien had always been selfish, but I'd attributed it to immaturity. Now I realized it was something deeper. He genuinely didn't understand how relationships were supposed to work. You had two women who cared about you, I said, really cared about you. And instead of appreciating that, you saw it as an opportunity to take more. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the $23,000, the secret credit cards, the 4 months of lies, the weekend getaway he'd planned with another woman during what should have been our honeymoon. The sympathy passed. My dad walked up to the altar. Damien, he said, you need to leave now. We'll have your belongings packed and sent to your mother's house. Don't contact my daughter again. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with difficult people. And if you try to avoid the lawsuit or flee the state, my dad continued, we'll make sure criminal charges are filed for the identity theft and credit card fraud. This was the first Damien was hearing about potential criminal charges. His face went white. Damien looked around the church one more time. At his family, his friends, the life he destroyed with his own choices. At the future he'd thrown away for temporary pleasures. At the two women who should have been competing for him, but instead were united against him. Then he walked out. The heavy church doors closed behind him with a final sounding thud. The church was silent for about 30 seconds. Then my grandmother started clapping. Soon everyone was clapping and cheering. Valencia and I hugged. My mom rushed up to the altar and wrapped both of us in her arms. You girls are incredible, she said, crying and laughing at the same time. The photographer, who had been capturing everything with professional discretion, asked if we wanted pictures. We did. Valencia and I posed together in our dresses, holding our bouquets. We looked like an unlikely pair of sisters, united by circumstance and mutual respect. My family joined us. Even some of Damien's family asked to be in the photos. His mother apologized profusely and hugged both of us. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I raised him better than this. I don't know what happened to him. His sister, who'd flown in from California with her 2 young daughters, was particularly upset. I brought my girls to see their uncle get married, she said, tears in her eyes. Instead, they got to see him exposed as a fraud. How do I explain this to them? Tell them the truth, Valencia said gently, that sometimes people make bad choices, but that doesn't mean we have to accept being treated badly. Father Martinez blessed our friendship officially. It was unconventional, but beautiful. By the power vested in me by God and the state, he said with a smile, I now pronounce you friends. Everyone laughed and applauded. The reception was supposed to be at the country club. We went anyway. The event coordinator, when she heard what had happened, was amazing. She'd been in the wedding industry for 20 years, she said, but had never seen anything like what we just pulled off. They rearranged everything to be a celebration of friendship instead of marriage. The DJ changed the playlist from romantic ballads to empowering anthems. The caterers served the food buffet style so people could mingle more easily. The centerpieces were adjusted to remove the bride and groom figurines, leaving just the flowers. The cake was still beautiful, even without the traditional topper. Valencia gave a speech about the importance of women supporting each other instead of competing. I gave a speech about the courage it takes to choose truth over comfort. My dad gave a speech about being proud of his daughter for refusing to settle for less than she deserved. Even Father Martinez stayed for dinner and gave a blessing about the unexpected ways God brings people together. It was the best party I'd ever been to. People danced, they laughed, they told stories about times they'd stood up for themselves or helped other women. It became a celebration of integrity and friendship and the power of truth. My college friends shared stories about times they'd caught boyfriends cheating and how they'd handled it. Older relatives talked about the importance of self-respect. Even the children seemed to understand that something important had happened. Even the wedding cake worked perfectly. Instead of a bride and groom on top, we put 2 flowers from our bouquets. 3 months later, Valencia and I had become genuine friends. She helped me navigate the legal process of getting my money back. I helped her find a new job at a company where she didn't have to see Damien every day. The lawsuit was settled out of court. Damien's parents, mortified by their son's behavior, insisted he pay me back in full with interest. He also had to pay for all the wedding expenses, which came to nearly $40,000. Damien was fired from his job after the financial irregularities came to light. His employer discovered he'd been stealing from client accounts for over a year. Criminal charges were filed for embezzlement and identity theft. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years of probation. He also had to pay restitution to his former employer and attend mandatory counseling. He moved back in with his mother after his release. Last I heard, he was working part-time at a car dealership 3 towns over and telling people he was the victim of 2 crazy ex-girlfriends who conspired against him. Some people never learn, but Valencia and I learned something important that day. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that happens to you. We both dodged a bullet, and we found a real friendship in the process. 6 months later, Valencia was my maid of honor at my actual wedding, to a man who thinks honesty is the most attractive quality a person can have. Someone who would never dream of lying about where he was going or who he was with. Someone who shows me his phone without being asked and talks about our future like it's the most important thing in the world. The ceremony was small and intimate, just family and close friends. Father Martinez officiated again, joking that he'd never been more nervous about a wedding ceremony in his life. Damien wasn't invited, but half the people from our fake wedding were there. celebrating what real love looks like. Valencia met her future husband at that reception too. One of my cousins who was impressed by her courage and grace under pressure. He'd watched her handle the most humiliating situation imaginable with dignity and kindness, and he knew she was special. They're getting married next spring. I'm going to be her maid of honor. And this time, I'm sure the groom will actually show up. The whole experience taught me something important about love and trust and standing up for yourself. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. Sometimes love isn't enough if it's not built on honesty, but sometimes the worst betrayal can lead to the best friendships. Valencia and I talk almost every day now. We vacation together. We celebrate holidays together. She's become the sister I never had, and neither of us will ever settle for lies again. We know what we deserve now, and we're never going back to accepting less.